I was going to continue with my thoughts on the Sermon on the Mount out of Matthew. Came to a very difficult passage, and I do plan to continue on that and engage with that. But today I digress, as a good Methodist preacher does. Being a Methodist preacher means certain things. It means that I am convinced and committed to the doctrine of holiness. It also means that I am committed and convinced of the doctrine of social justice. This being Martin Luther King Day, I thought that I would reflect upon Dr. King's words. These words are taken from a letter from a Birmingham jail. There was a time when the church was powerful. It was a time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early Christians entered a town, the people in power became disturbed and immediately sought to convict the Christians for being disturbers of the peace, outside agitators. But the Christians pressed on in the conviction that they were a colony of heaven, called to obey God rather than man. Small in number, they were big in commitment. They were too God intoxicated to be astronomically intimidated. By their effort and example, they brought an end to ancient evils such as infanticide and gladiatorial conquest. Things are different now. So often the contemporary church is weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often it is an arch defender of the status quo, far from being distributed by the presence of the church. The power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silence, and often even vocal sanctions of the way things are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. Every day I meet young people whose disappointment with the church has turned into outright disgust. When the Anglican Church became the status quo, John Wesley rose up and formed the Methodist societies. Out of that came concern for the oppressed and the poor, social reform, prison reform. John Wesley's good friend, William Wilberforce, led the charge to end slavery in the British Empire. When the Episcopal Methodist Church in America became the status quo, Orange Scott rose up and formed the Wesleyan Methodist Church, a church that was strongly active in the abolition movement. Across my desk have come many books and articles about the substantial rise of the nuns, as they call them, those who check the box that say no religious affiliation in the polls. There have been lots of books and articles at how to deal with this change and how to deal and teach the younger generation. The bottom line is that Dr. King's prophecy has come true. Too many of the younger generation just find the church to be social clubs, irrelevant, with no meaning in the now 21st century. the church has once begun become the church of the status quo. We find our church much like the church in Laodicea. Laodicea was bordered by two springs. One was a hot spring, which was said to have brought about healing. The other was a cold spring that was good for drinking water. But the aqueducts ran the water into Laodicea, and what ended up there was very tepid water, bitter water, that wasn't really good for drinking or anything else for that matter. And Jesus uses this metaphor when he says, you're not hot, you're not cold, you're not really useful for anything. Much like many churches in America, the church in Laodicea thought it was doing well. It was prospering. Surely that was a sign that God was blessing the church in Laodicea. But he told them they were really blind to their situation. Proverbs 29:18 states, where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained. But happy is one who keeps the law. The word for unrestrained literally means going about naked. It is the same metaphor Jesus used in the church of Laodicea. They thought that they were clothed in their righteousness, but Jesus said, you are going around naked. They had lost their vision of what the church was supposed to look like. They had been lured away by their wealth and prosperity. They had lost their vision of what Christians were supposed to look like. I think Dr. King sums this all up of what a Christian should look like. A Christian should have a response to social justice. He wrote this quite well in the letter from Birmingham jail. You might want to read it sometime if you can find the time.